Well, thank you for joining us today. We're very excited to announce a number of series of events, webinars that we're going to be hosting for our current PaperCut customers, ways that we can teach our current accounts and our clients here how else we can look within PaperCut to maybe expand on that for your guys' organization. So we're happy to have you. We will be recording this and can share this as well. Again, for any chat questions you have, please throw those in chat. We'll take a look at that. My name is Amy Lindgren. I'm the Solutions Manager at Marco, and we partner with PaperCut for a number of years now. And again, thanks for joining us. I'm going to pass this over to Ross Wood, who is our partner with PaperCut, to be able to go over the solution of Print Deploy, which if you haven't heard from it before, it is a print queue deployment tool that allows you to get the right print drivers and the right queues to the right person at the right time effectively. So Ross, go ahead and take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amy, and really excited to be here. And thank you everyone for joining. And again, we do apologize for technical difficulties from last week. Thank you for coming back if you are joining us the second time. And welcome to all of those who are joining the first time. My name is Ross Wood. I've been working around PaperCut for about 8 years. Got a lot of great experience, but the nice thing is that we can talk to you about specific feature sets, such as Print Deploy. And so with this feature, what we're going to actually talk about is a quick overview of the product itself. And so Print Deploy is a unique tool that was added to PaperCut just a few years ago. So if you're not on the latest version, you may not necessarily see what I'm going to show today. The nice thing is that you can always ask for assistance with getting updated to the latest version. And as long as you have current maintenance and support, it's very easy to do. We're going to follow up that overview with a quick demo of what this feature looks like within the product. Then we'll cover some licensing. That way you know what that looks like, because this is considered what you could call an add-on. But the nice thing is there is a built-in zone that you can use and start toying around with today. So if you are on the latest version and you'd like to open up your PaperCut interface, you will be able to see some of the cool things that I'm able to show and kind of start playing around with it and getting familiar with this feature set within the product. And then, of course, we'll address any and all questions. We're going to do the questions along the way, but we'll open up at the end just to kind of go through any remaining questions that maybe we haven't gotten around to. So with that said, let's jump right into an overview of what we're talking about. And so Print Deploy, it comes as a feature that really was meant to address complexity. You could think of things like with multiple locations, right? If you have campuses, stores, branches, office locations, multiple sites, maybe you have a mobile workforce, people who move around between locations. Another pretty common question that we get is, what about with mixed environments where we do have print servers, but we have a lot of direct IP printing as well? Do you have a tool that can help with both? And the answer is yes, as a short answer. But then there's also the different operating systems. Maybe you've got users with Macs, Windows, Chromebooks, or even Linux. So the nice thing is being able to address all of these different things with a unique tool that allows you to deploy your print queues to all of your end users. And one of the most common questions is, can you do location-based print queue deployment, right? Especially when we think of those direct IP print queues, or just a direct printer, if you will. So thinking of all these different complex challenges that different customers work with, PaperCut wanted to come up with a solution that could help address all of it. And this solution came in the name of Print Deploy. So let's look at what PaperCut decided to design with their development team and add to the product. So the print deployment tool, also known as Print Deploy, is meant to address exactly those things: the multiple locations, the mobile users on the go, and even the mixed fleet of managed PCs. When you look at how users print, their needs to be able to print to the right printer based on the location they're at, right? They don't want to see a long list of printers that shows every printer available on the network. Maybe they only want to see printers that are on the third floor where they're located. Maybe they only want to see printers that are in location A versus location B, C, and D. You could have offices that are spread out from San Francisco to New York. And this is going to be a great tool that allows you to deploy the printers that a user needs in that specific area versus seeing this long list. And what that ultimately does, and this is where a lot of the conversation is driven, is it helps to reduce IT support tickets. Those common questions, help requests. Hey, please help me. I'm trying to print to this printer here. Maybe they're not even sure what the name of the printer is. Maybe they're not sure if they're looking at the right printers for that location, or maybe they just got relocated to a new office and they're bringing their laptop with them. All of those can tie into a lot of requests that can really bog down the help desk. And so our goal is to show a solution that will help not only reduce IT support tickets, so yay for the IT admin, but it also gives something for the end users that really just simplifies printing for them so that they can just go about their typical daily routine without having to spend too much time thinking about it. And here's your elevator pitch, if you will. And Amy said this very well in the very beginning. Print deploy takes the complexity out of print queue deployment by getting the right driver and the right print queue to the right person in the right location. And here's a fun word, auto magically. There is a little bit of magic in behind the scenes, but I'm going to show you what that magic looks like in case we have anybody who's on the IT administrative side and who has access to maybe make some controls within their PaperCut interface to start setting some of this up and to look at how it could help benefit you as a current customer. So let's jump right into it. How does this work? What does this do and how do we do it? So what we have is a cloner tool. This cloner tool is actually able to copy all of the print queues from what you could call a reference computer. Now this quote unquote reference computer could be a print server, but it could also be as simple as a workstation that happens to be set up with all the different print queues that are needed. You could think of someone who's sitting in an office and maybe you've set up their computer to have all the print queues for that location or for all locations because, well, let's face it, if you're trying to give them all the printers that they potentially need and you're not sure exactly which ones, maybe you give them all to them. So this reference computer, whether again it's a print server or just a typical workstation, we can use this cloner tool to actually grab all of those existing print queues and then bring them into PaperCut for you to be able to configure and deploy. And once you've configured your zones and you've deployed the queues, this is going to save you from having to write GPOs. This is going to save you from having to write up code to push out the print queues and the drivers and default settings and everything else that typically goes into that. And the nice thing is once it's done, you can enjoy it. And what we hope is that you're going to see a mass reduction in those help desk tickets and a silence on the support line, if you will, from end users who are asking, how do I print to this printer over here? Or why is it that when I try to print to it, nothing spits out? So that's going to be kind of what we're working towards here. Now, the reference computer itself, it has its different queues. Once those queues are cloned and brought into the PaperCut server, this is going to be where you're able to control creating the different zones. And now when I talk about zones, I'm going to dive into this a little deeper, but typically a zone will reflect something like a branch office. It could reflect a floor within a building. It could reflect a department, right? So however you see zones working best for you, that's how you can create them. And we have a couple of variables that you can use to create the zones, such as IP address, host name of the computer, or even user groups. Since PaperCut syncs with Active Directory and we're able to bring those user groups in, we can leverage that as part of creating these zones as well. So an example could be that maybe admin gets certain printers that other end users do not, and they can actually be in the same office and be around the same printers. So that's the kind of capability and control that you will have as an admin. So it's really just about cloning these queues, bringing them in, and then deciding how do we want to separate these zones. For the purpose of today's presentation, I'm going to base it as if we were separating different branch offices, but keep in mind, you could absolutely be basing this on groups of users or even floors within a building, not necessarily entirely completely different offices. So let's go ahead and jump right into the product itself. This is where I want to spend kind of the bulk of the time for today, and that's going through the product and how it works when you're actually logged into PaperCut. So this is just a nice video that's going to be on loop, and I wanted to share this as part of the presentation in case y'all get a copy and want to be able to look at this. It's just showing that once you've had reference printers that are brought in from that reference computer, you can add them to a zone and hit deploy. Now, the quick catch here is that when it's pushing this, this deployment out, What it's going to be looking for are users' workstations that have a client installed. This client install will work across different OSs, but that is required for them to, let's just say, receive the signal, if you will. And that client tool is pretty intelligent itself. If a user happens to be logged into their workstation, but let's just say they turned it off completely and they went home for the weekend and they haven't been back because they're on vacation, and you made some changes to create a zone. That client tool will absolutely check in and do kind of a health system check, if you will, back to the server to say, hey, do I still match? Am I still falling within having the printers and the queues and the drivers that I need based on where I'm located, whether that be IP address, host name, or even user group? So let me go ahead and actually bring up the admin interface. So if you've logged into PaperCut as an admin, this probably looks familiar to you. We're just logging in and I've just got a quick restart to my session. And once I'm logged into my demo server, I'm actually going to navigate to this section called Enable Printing. Keep in mind that if you're not running the latest versions, you may not see this tab here. So if you don't see this tab, that should be an automatic cue to reach out and ask for help and assistance with updating to the latest version. Of course, you can also go to the About tab and you can check for the latest version right here. It'll show you what version you're running. And when you hit check for updates, it'll take you to a page where you can download and see latest versions. But let's go back to this Enable Printing tab. Now, the first section that pops up is going to be Print Deploy. And you can see I already have several zones that are created. This is going to be our zones in the middle of the page. And we can add and create zones with this green button here. I can sort my zones by name or even by priority. But I can also look to the right. And this is where you're going to identify the different print queues. This is where the cloner tool has actually gone out and identified the print queues that we want to bring into the PaperCut application server. Now, should I need to add or update this list, you can actually see where I have a couple of options by simply hitting this little plus button right here next to the print queues. Once I hit this plus button, I'm presented with the two options where I can use this cloner tool, and you can easily download that cloner tool to be able to then push out for your different either workstations or print servers. If you have multiple print servers, you have multiple workstations that you need to clone and bring in these queues and drivers for, no worries. If you're wondering, hey, I see that green button highlights Windows. What about Mac or Linux? Those are just hidden down beneath. PaperCut's intuitive to know, to recognize that I'm running on a Windows operating system, which is why it has highlighted this option for me. If you were on a Mac, it would highlight the Mac option. If you're on Linux, it would do the same. So it's going to basically see what kind of operating system I'm on. It says, okay, you're on Windows. Here's your cloner tool. But of course, if we needed it for the other two versions, I can download it right here. So that's going to be the cloner tool that would get put in on that reference computer, if you will. That's going to be the cloner tool that could go onto the print server. And that's going to be the cloner tool that gives us this list. Now, this said list, if you notice, I'm going to hover over each icon. It's showing the different drivers for one print queue. So this brother right here happens to have 4 different drivers that we can associate with it. So the nice thing about when you set up a zone and you deploy out your queues and drivers is, again, the client tool is going to recognize the operating system that the user is on, and it's going to give them the correct driver based on that operating system. It doesn't help if we can push out a bunch of Windows drivers that don't work on Mac, or Mac drivers that don't work on Chromebook, or vice versa. So you will see that you have all 4 options that are listed on some of these, or I can even be specific as to just having the one. This is going to be based on when you're cloning and bringing in these print queues and drivers, which of course, if you ever wanted to test and see this, you will have access out of the box to create one free zone without any additional licensing required today. So you will have this one free zone, which works great for a couple of things. First of all, PaperCut's always been used for find me printing, or that secure print release queue that follows you around so that you can tap a badge or put in a pin code to release your jobs. When you're using a find me print queue for all of your MFDs, your copiers, your walk-up devices, if you will, that's going to cover pretty much everything you need. And you can absolutely add the find me print queue to your one base zone. But then what about some of the direct print queues, some of the IP-based print queues for, say, single function printers, specialty printers, wide format, maybe even have a nice fancy marketing printer that doesn't get put in and made part of the Find Me print queue. There's a lot of use cases outside of this one virtual print queue that you can use, where it's nice to be able to say, hey, if I had a couple others I wanted to add to this, and I want to push them out to everyone, could I? And so let's pick on, I'm just going to use this deploy zone right here. And we can see here that right at the top, I have that Find Me print queue. I actually have two of them. I could actually easily just remove one, just to show you how easy that is. We've got a Konica, we've got a Brother, we've got a Xerox, and we've got another Find Me, but this one's specific to HP devices, right? So when we look at being able to deploy these queues, I mentioned earlier that when you're creating the zone, there was a couple of variables that you can use to identify a specific zone. Let's start with IP range. So an IP range can be used to identify locations when a customer has their network environment set up so that typically this third octet here is used to identify an office, a location, a branch, a site, or even a floor within a building. So I always use the example of 192.168.10.0, so .10 being the identifier for a location. And we can go all the way to .255, meaning it covers everybody that's on this .10 networking scheme. Now, this goes to all users that fall within this IP range, right? But if I wanted to be more specific and I wanted to say, hey, you know what? I want to create a zone that was specific for admins. Let me hit edit zone here. And you'll see that I can select specific user groups to be able to say, hey, you know what? I'm going to create a zone that's for this .10 location, but it's for admins and they're going to get certain printers. And then I'm going to create a second zone that's also .10 in the IP range, but it's going to be, instead of admins, it's going to be for HR and marketing and other typical users who are coming and going willy-nilly. The nice thing about combining the two, and you can do this as much as you want and please, is that now you can create up multiple zones, not even to segment offices, but then to segment groups of users within offices. So I always like to use the example of admins versus typical users, but there's a lot of other scenarios like teachers versus students. When you think of education, whether it be higher ed or even K through 12, sometimes we want teachers to have specific print devices that other users do not. And then there's this third variable that we can use. And again, we can combine or even isolate. I could simply say all users. I could simply say all IP addresses. And I could use host names for computers. Now, this is going to be great for finance, government, healthcare, anyone who typically could use maybe shared workstations. Maybe you have a Citrix type of environment, or maybe it just works out better because, hey, let's face it, we don't have an IP scheme that matches specific office locations, but we do have a host naming scheme that we can identify workstations within an office. So this third variable is just to give you that flexibility to decide, well, what's going to work best for deciding if a user is at location A, what printers are they going to see? So I'm going to back up, and it turns out that for this location or this IP range and users and host names, we're going to see these 5 print queues. Now, I just made a couple of quick changes. Let me add a printer here. So let's just pick on, why not, Office Printer. And I'm going to hit Save and Deploy. So once you've made your changes and you hit the Save and Deploy, whether you're adding or removing printers that will be made available to the users in that zone, the only thing that we need to have in place ahead of these changes is this Print Deploy client. Now, this client is separate from the user client that we've talked about in the past, being that you can have a pop-up authentication. This client is specific to doing that check that I mentioned earlier. So if their computer was turned off when I hit Save and Deploy, no worries. Their Windows or Mac or Chrome or Linux device, once they log back in and turn their computer back on, it's going to do a quick system check. It's going to ping the PaperCut server. It will see the changes that have taken place, and it's going to update auto-magically. Here we go back, tying back that word, for all the users who happen to fall in this zone. So that's where we can say, hey, you know what? This is not only great for initial deployments, this is fantastic for when you're changing your printer fleet. This is fantastic when you're updating devices and need to push out new drivers and queues because the new models came out with new drivers and you want to create new print queues. Absolutely. My go-to sales pitch, if you will, is you won't have to write a GPO for that anymore. The only GPO that I might ask you to do is actually to push out this print deploy client, but you can also use tools like Jamf, Windows Intune, or any other deployment mechanisms that you use within your network for your managed devices. I do want to circle back to IP range, and here's why. Let's look at our different zones here. So we looked at the deploy zone. Let's look at chemistry, right? This covers all IP ranges. If I had this other zone set up, and I'm just going to hit real quick here, and I did another selected zone, and let's just call it 192.168.11.0, and let's just say I ran it through 192.168.11.255. Okay. If I have these two different zones, and they have two different IP ranges, and you have users who are mobile, so they travel between locations. The nice thing is that if they take their managed device with them, whether it be their Chromebook, it's their laptop, hopefully not a plugged-in computer they have to unplug and replug in everywhere they go. But if you think of the laptops and the different mobile devices that they're carrying with them, to identify that they've picked up a new IP range, right? Because when you go from location A to location B, you're connecting to the Wi-Fi router that's at the new location. And once you've connected to that new Wi-Fi router, you get a new IP address. So those mobile users, when they go to hit Control P, File Print, however they get to this screen, and they go to look at their list of options, one of the biggest things is they could end up calling the help desk and say, hey, I just got over here to this other location. I need to print to these printers. That goes away because this list of print options that you're seeing on my screen here will automatically be updated based on their IP range or their IP address of the laptop that they're using. So if they do have a managed device and they do travel, and this could be, from LA to New York, and it could also be from LA to Melbourne, Australia. As long as it's an office that's part of y'all's network that y'all manage and host, the really cool thing is that it can automatically happen in the background. So by the time the user goes to hit print, their list is automatically updated. So as long as they actually get to hitting print and they haven't started asking for help before then, they're going to have the printers available. And if they did reach out, the IT help desk could simply say, go ahead and try printing for me and tell me what printers you see. And they should see all the printers that are for that location. Something else that is really cool, and I love using this for an example of, say, like a wide format or a marketing printer or something that's a little bit, let's just say, fancier. Maybe we have print queues and print drivers we do want to share with most everyone in a given office. But what if, and let's just go with the use case of a university, what if the chemistry department had a fancy color printer that does booklet and all this other stuff, but we don't necessarily want to give that to everyone? You're going to see this option to set as an optional install. You can identify the user groups that you want to have access to this optional install. So if I wanted to edit zone and say, hey, you know what? I'm going to make this available to a specific group of users. And let's just do marketing just for the sake of it. So being able to do marketing, what's really cool is this optional install is going to give the users the ability to use that same client that's installed, but it has a dashboard tool that can actually reside at the bottom of their screen in that little Windows taskbar at the bottom. They can double click and open it up. And I'm going to show you exactly what that user experience looks like, where they can actually be prompted to see printers that they can then install themselves. So whether you want an automatic deployment in the background and it pushes everything out to them automatically, or you say, hey, there's certain printers that I'd like for them to have the option to use, but I don't want it automatically installing because maybe they tend to just start printing to it when they don't necessarily need to. Whatever the use case is, you can absolutely designate different devices as optional installs. or automatic. And it's as easy as a couple of clicks. And of course, once we've made a change that we are happy with and want to deploy, it's as simple as hitting that save and deploy button. So 3 variables to create the zones: IP range, user groups, and host names. We have a cloning tool that we're able to bring in our different drivers and queues. And I will mention, we can also import those BYOD, or what you would call mobility print queues. So if you do use the mobility or BYOD service with PaperCut, we can absolutely deploy those within zones as well. So mobile devices, Chromebooks, tablets, whatever BYOD type of device you can imagine, we can also deploy those out within the zones. We have our entire list of all of our available printers to add to our zones. And of course, within each one, I'm just going to open this one, we have our different drivers that are associated. So being able to use a very specific driver that's to that model of device. So if I wanted to have a brother specific OEM driver here for Windows, I could, or if I just want to use a generic global PostScript driver, I can use that as well, which PaperCut does have, as you can see, and we can deploy those. Okay. Let's go ahead. And the one other thing that I did want to mention, so we talked about users who travel in between sites and locations. We talked about users who just want to be able to see the short list of printers, not the very extensive one. And we've even talked about users who happen to be in a shared workstation environment. I just wanted to reiterate that PaperCut is very proud to announce that we have a partnership with Citrix. So if you happen to be looking at implementing Citrix in your environment and you're wondering how this will work, we have a brand new feature release that will be coming out later this year that we'll be happy to share with y'all as well. So keep that in mind. If you happen to hear me say shared workstations, or you happen to hear me say Citrix, that we do have an official partnership, and you can find PaperCut listed in the Citrix Ready Marketplace. Let's go ahead and bring back up our PowerPoint. Okay. So I wanted to show what the end user experience looks like for optional printers. And in this case, we're kind of using the example of a university. So that first screen that you saw was a login screen. Now you can prompt users to have to log in to see the printers that they need. And you're going to notice the automatically installed printers happening on this list to the left. So it's just the print management utility, the typical service option that if they wanted to install printers, and looking at the list of available devices. And you'll notice that 2 of them automatically installed. The user didn't have to do anything. So this is that deployment tool in action from the end user experience. If, for example, not just a shared workstation to say, hey, well, what about healthcare, government, finance? What about higher ed, where you have a library? What about different types of environments where many users could walk up to the same computer and log in? Whether the login actually pertains to the user, where, of course, we could identify user groups and push the driver, or you say, hey, I have a generic Windows session that's open and anybody can walk up and start to print and do things. They just have to log into their apps and they have to log into maybe internet-based services. That's where this manual login could come in handy so that we can identify who that user is. And I'll use the example of teacher versus student in a library. So if a teacher walks up and she logs into the same computer, she would get different printer options than, say, a student would. So that's just to give you a quick synopsis of what this looks like from an end user experience, including if they needed to log in and how it automatically installs. I want to pause, and Amy, I want to hand it to you just to see kind of as we've gone through that and we've shown how this works and some of the capabilities, if you've gotten any questions or anybody reach out about asking about that.
You must be doing such a great job. I have not seen any questions coming through yet, Ross.
All right, fantastic. Well, everyone will be excited to see then this next section, which is going to be our features and pricing. I did mention that one zone comes free right out of the box. So if you've got PaperCut up and running today, you're at least running version, I want to say it's 19.1 or newer, you should be able to see everything that I've shown thus far. And I highly recommend you checking and making sure that you're, if anything, running version 22 or later. Okay. So feature pack options. Let's go with what's included as standard out of the box, and then we'll cover what you can get with the additional purchase, the add-on. And that add-on is called the Advanced Print Enablement Pack. So out of the box, I mentioned we get the one zone. That one zone does mean that we can set the print defaults and capabilities, the dupox, the simplex. We can push out all the different printers. We just have the one zone to do it within. So it's a great tool out of the box to say, hey, you know what? I've got the Find Me print queue, which is for all of my copiers. And then I've got just a handful of single function printers. And I'm just going to push those out to everybody because maybe we're a singular office. We don't even have multiple locations. That's perfectly fine. And that's going to work great for you. This even works with the domain joined and non-domain joined devices, so managed or even unmanaged devices. BYOD devices, if you will. The direct printing. I want to reiterate that this cloning tool doesn't necessarily need to grab an SMB print queue, something that's meant to go through a print server. If that cloning tool was put on a workstation where Sally Sue, who works at the front desk, has a printer that she shares with a few other people in the office, and that printer happens to be just a locally shared direct IP, direct print queue, doesn't go through a print server at all, we can share those print queues and drivers with multiple users as well. So again, we could do that with our one zone, and we could, of course, the traditional printing. I think that's to be expected. And we can even do Mac and Windows. And Linux and Chromebook, keep in mind, I haven't had a time to update this slide, but if you noticed on the earlier part of the presentation where I was demoing, that you saw Linux and Chromebook are readily available. So don't worry about this part that says shortly after lunch. Now, where we get into the branch office support, so having multiple zones, more than one zone, we want to do different IPs, different groups, different host names of computers, or even want to have a combination thereof. That's going to be when we get into the additional purchase. That's where we're going to have multiple zones. That's where we're going to have the ability to filter out an IP range or even multiple IP ranges. If you're thinking, hey, it turns out I do multiple subnets within my network to segment different areas, we can work within that as well. So definitely reach out to your Marco team and ask them to help you out with that. Now, with the additional purchase, we get everything. That's going to be everything that Print Deploy has to offer. And the best part about how it is sold today. Now, I want to encourage everybody who's on this call today that if you are interested to reach out, to get a quote, and to consider making a purchase before September, October timeframe of this year. And the reason I'm saying that is you're at a huge advantage today. PaperCut, when they first came out with this, realized that they had something that was a good fit for the market. Competitively, it did a lot of great things, but it's currently priced at a flat fee plus M&S, meaning it's basically just a one-time purchase. It's flat fee no matter how many devices, no matter how many zones, no matter how many locations, no matter how many users, right? All of that is completely unlimited. And this advanced print enablement pack, we're expecting to see a price change coming up in September and October. So you're coming in at a great point to look at this, evaluate it, even test it within your environment, and then hopefully potentially look at adding this into your current licensing model so you can get grandfathered in and have this print enablement pack already at the set price that it's at today, which it is at a steal. So reach out, ask for quotes. The beauty of when you ask for a quote is you don't have to worry about how many print queues. You don't have to worry about how many printers, again, sites, branches, stores, campuses, or even users. It's going to be that simple one price flat rate fee. And there's no ballooning cost over time. So what that really ties into is there are other competitive products that do a lot of these things that are based on number of print queues and print queue profiles, or even some of them that are based on number of printers. And since this is going to be for unlimited print devices within your network, including ones that aren't licensed for PaperCut, don't think of this as associating it purely with printers that you have licensed for PaperCut. If you had, I don't know, 20 copiers on the Find Me print queue, but you had 1,000 single function printers, that's totally fine. And this will work for the 1,000 printers the same that it would for the copiers, the MFDs. So a little bit about who's this for. Cover a little bit about what the target audience is and typically who wants to get this advanced enablement pack as an add-on to their environment. So I think the easiest one to identify is any company who has multiple sites or locations, or they have mobile users in combination with those multiple sites locations. So whether you have a corporate office with a couple of smaller sites, or maybe you're just a combination of multiple small sites, or maybe you've got a campus as a university and you have multiple buildings on the campus. Anytime you look at distributed sites or mobile users, this is a fantastic tool. And I think anyone on the call that's dealt with writing GPOs and dealt with the help desk tickets that come in related to, hey, I'm just trying to print, could understand the need to be able to save time, reduce that IT support. And let's face it, anytime we can reduce help desk tickets, that's a win. And of course, increasing end user productivity because now that they have the printers that they need based on where they are at all times, they don't have to reach out and ask for help. And if they have that optional install option, even better. Maybe they go and look at their little toolbar, they open up the client, and they just check to see which printers they can add, and they add them on their own. So a self-service client on top of everything else that you can do auto magically. Another great example is organizations who maybe have a little bit of a mixed environment or even are looking to get away from having to manage a print server and are okay with, hey, we're going to move everything to direct IP printing. Now, there's a little bit of pros and cons that go with this. So the way I like to address it for our current customer base is if you've already got a great Find Me print queue that's set up and works with all of your multifunctional devices, but you're wondering, how can I help use this for all of my single function printers that are maybe not on the print server, or I don't want to have to add them to the print server because they get switched out more frequently, whatever the use case is, this works great in those environments. Not only does it save time and you can keep your Find Me print queue exactly how it is today, but you can deploy and push out the direct IP printers or just direct printers, if you will, to any users that you need to, or even all users. Now that printing is set up and it just works, we have a great function and feature set to provide security. As you know, or hopefully know today, secure print release is a top feature for PaperCut. And this is true whether we're using the Find Me print queue or even a direct print queue. You do have the capability to do a secure print release with the tap of a badge, with the use of a PIN code, or even scanning a QR code. And that is true even for single function printers. So not only can you push out the drivers and queues, but if you've ever been interested in saying, hey, I've got a lot of direct IP printing that we're doing outside of the Find Me print queue. I haven't added these devices to the print server where we've set up this Find Me print queue. Well, the beautiful thing is that you could have a shared, let's just say for a hospital, right? You could have a shared nurses station printer that sits at the front desk of the nurses station. And maybe we want to add the ability to do a tap and release where they don't have to do a thing but tap their badge and it automatically spits out all the print jobs that belongs to that nurse. We can do that. Same thing with students in a library or students in a lab, right? I think the chemistry is actually a good example of where you could have a lab environment and maybe they're printing off work that they're doing. I think another example is where you have users who are in any kind of common or shared space. And maybe you just happen to throw in a single function printer in that area because they don't need to copy, scan, fax. They don't need all the other bells and whistles. So just a basic printer works. But what we don't want is someone walking away with someone else's print jobs. You could use print deploy not only to push out the print queue to all of those workstations in the lab or all the users who are coming and going, but you could also within PaperCut add security and have secure print release. And the best part about all of this is that you can stop anonymous printing in all of your different branches and have a true control of all of your costs. Having the Find Me print queue and having all of your server-based print queues are great for being able to manage and control them. But also, what about, again, the direct IP print queues and seeing those? PaperCut is full of the tools, the know-how, and you couldn't have a better partner with Marco to be able to help implement it and to be able to help provide you the resources you need to get the best use case and end result. I mentioned this earlier, but I think it's worth noting that yes, while we had all the different drivers associated with specific queues, that is going to really help when you think of writing GPOs or when you think of how print queues and print drivers are typically deployed today. You've got to do one for Chrome, one for Mac, one for Windows. We've now consolidated all of that into one tool. We've now consolidated all of that into one admin interface so that a user, regardless of what they're using, as long as they have that client installed on their device, they're going to be able to get the necessary drivers and queues. And that's, of course, is going to help increase that end user productivity. So we're not going to be in that scenario where it's like, hey, if you're working with a Windows computer, great, we've got you covered. But when it comes to Mac, you're kind of on your own, right? That's going to kind of go to the wayside. A nice, simplified, and centralized tool for you to use. This is something that I think is really important to mention, which is computers that are not necessarily joined to a local domain, right? So this is something that is becoming more and more prevalent when you think of BYOD, when you think of users who have their own laptops or devices, work from home. There's a lot of scenarios that have played into this in the last couple of years, and thanks to COVID, it really ramped it up kind of unexpectedly. So managing that, working with that, and providing the best scenario, this is another use case where you could say that there's a great benefit and added value into using print deploy so that it can help you to push out your drivers and queues. And we can use those, by the way, those mobility queues to bypass the Windows print nightmare. So for some reason, which I hope not today, but if for some reason you are still acknowledging and dealing with that on a regular basis, reach out to your Marco team and ask how deploying mobility queues could help with that admin install requirement with the Windows print nightmare. If you're not familiar with it, that's probably a good thing. If you are familiar with it but still dealing with it, highly recommend reaching out because that's another great use case for leveraging print deploy within PaperCut. And with that, I'd love to say thank you to everybody, and I really appreciate your time. And Amy, I appreciate you setting this up. But I would like to open the floor in case we've had any questions. So, Amy, do we have anything that we want to run?